All right, welcome to the camera comparison. This is the iPhone 11 Pro versus the Pixel 4. Both of these cameras right now are shooting in 1080p. Unfortunately, the Pixel 4 can't shoot in 4K for the front-facing camera. Only the iPhone can. So that's one of the drawbacks of the Pixel 4. If you wanted 4K crispiness for the front camera, then you got to go with the iPhone. Now, you guys let me know how this audio sounds right now based on what I'm seeing. Both phones are doing a pretty good job in terms of stabilization. You guys let me know which one looks better, which one sounds better, and which one is more stabilized. So now again, same thing, front-facing camera. I kept the Pixel 4 at full HD, iPhone 11 Pro at 4K. You guys let me know if you see like a quality improvement. Based on what I'm seeing, it looks like it's a lot sharper just because we're obviously playing with a higher resolution. Backgrounds in both phones seem to be pretty even in terms of exposure, maybe slightly bright on the iPhone, but it's hard to tell since I'm just looking at both of these screens. And last up is the 1080p stabilization test. We're gonna do a little bit of running. I'm gonna chase my daughter, see who wins. She's on a bike. You guys let me know which one looks the smoothest. Probably gonna die of an asthma attack. You gotta do it for the tubes. Now this is slow motion, and the iPhone can do up to 240 frames per second at 1080p, whereas the Pixel 4 is limited to 120 frames per second at 1080p. Both phones do a great job. I like the color quality on both of these devices. I think they both look great. In fact, the colors look better on slow motion with the Pixel 4 than it does in the regular video. Now, if you want the best slow motion out of these two, you're gonna have to go with the iPhone just because it can slow it down a lot more since it uses 240 frames per second. So this is 1080p video on both phones using the rear camera. Stabilization is pretty good on both devices, but my God, the difference in colors is night and day. The Pixel 4 just looks flat, washed out, and the detail comparison just looks better on the iPhone 11 Pro. Now we're doing it again, this time in 4K with both phones. The iPhone can do 60 frames per second, but the Pixel can't. I left this on 30. Similar results. It's a lot clearer now on the Pixel 4, but it just doesn't look nearly as good as the iPhone. Same idea, 4K video at nighttime. Both phones are doing a pretty good job. Stabilization is great. The Pixel 4 is brighter, but it's introducing a lot more noise into the video to compensate. And it's also making the sky look a little bit too blue, considering it's not that blue at this time of night. Now, I will say though, the iPhone 11 Pro is doing a better job of picking up the details. If you look at the sign that says Petman, you can read it a lot more clearly on the iPhone than you can on the Pixel 4. Now this is your first daytime shot. I wanted to test dynamic range, and I have to say the Pixel 4 definitely looks better. The iPhone looks more vibrant and contrasty, but the Pixel 4 does a better job with white balance and exposing the faces on the subjects. Both photos are kind of blown out in the background, but overall I'm gonna give the slight advantage to the Pixel 4. Now this is another photo. We're indoors. We're taking a picture of the background being blown out because of the sun. I wanted to see how these cameras would handle it. This is a beautiful cock, and I have to say they both did a good job, but again, I'm gonna give the slight advantage to the Pixel 4. I think it did a slightly better job with the exposure. You can tell with the reflection on the table and with the trees in the background. This photo, I also want to show you the difference in terms of color science again. The Pixel 4 leaning towards those vibrant yellows and contrasty colors, where the iPhone just tends to look a lot more natural. I am finding the iPhone to look a little bit sharper, not by much, but it is noticeable in this picture. So this is the same photo, but this time we're using the 2x telephoto lens, and I wanted to see the shift in color science between both of these lenses. I am finding it to be more consistent with the iPhone. Like when you switch from the main lens to the telephoto lens, the colors look very equal. Whereas on the Pixel, it's still pushing towards the yellows, but it's not as vibrant and contrasty as it is with the main sensor. So here's another photo. Color science is different again. Pixel 4, contrasty, more yellows, more vibrant, looks better straight out of the camera. iPhone 11 Pro, a lot more natural, so this is very subjective, but there is definitely more dynamic range with the Pixel 4. Like look at beside the shed, it's not crushing the shadows as much. You can actually see the leaves beside the shed compared to the iPhone where it's just too dark to make out those details. So again, same photo, but this time we're using the 2x telephoto lens zoomed all the way in, same color science, Pixel 4 doing a much better job. If you look at the brick of the house behind the shed, you can make out the individual bricks, whereas on the iPhone, the highlights have been completely blown out. It's funny though, because the exposure on both of these photos are pretty similar, but you're just getting a lot more dynamic range with the Pixel 4. It's the same concept as before. If you look beside the shed on the left-hand side, you can actually make out the bush, whereas on the iPhone 11 Pro, you can't, just because the shadows are a bit too dark. This is the exact same photo, but this time with the ultra-wide lens on the iPhone 11 Pro. Just looks very different. Gives you a different feel, different type of emotion, something that the Pixel 4 can't do because they decided to omit an ultra-wide lens. In this photo, we're facing the sun, and this is a good way to test out dynamic range. And I'm finding it to be pretty good on both of these phones. But again, the slight edge to the Pixel 4, just look at the door. You can make out those details much better, even though it does look like there's a bit more noise. The iPhone looks a lot more natural, like this looks like a typical photo at this time of day, but the Pixel 4 kind of looks cool. It kind of looks like a nice vintage shot. Now it's time to test portrait mode using the rear cameras. The Pixel 4 definitely blurs the background a lot more than the iPhone, but you can change the blur amount using the app on the iPhone. So you can fine tune it to whatever blur you like in the background. I do like the colors better on the iPhone this time. I think they look a lot more vibrant. They're a little bit more punchy. I'm finding them to be a bit too flat on the Pixel 4, but when you zoom in to check out which one did a better job around the edges of the subject, the Pixel 4 won. Look at the hair. On the bottom of the hair, for both of these phones, it didn't do a good job. But when you look between the hair and the jacket, the iPhone completely missed the background and left it in the foreground, whereas the Pixel 4 completely blurred it out. Same with her pom-pom on the top of her hat. The edges on the iPhone 11 Pro are just way too soft. The Pixel 4 just did a much better job of picking out the individual tussles on her pom-pom to make it look more realistic. So this is a nighttime shot. We're using a subject, which happens to be myself. The Pixel has night sight. The iPhone 11 Pro has its own night photography baked into the camera app. They both did a pretty good job. The iPhone 11 Pro did a better job with the color science. Like, that's actually how my jeans looked, whereas on the Pixel 4, they're a little bit too blue, but the Pixel 4 did a much better job with the rollout. Like, if you look at my shirt, you look at my face, the highlights are just not rolling off properly on the iPhone 11 Pro. They're kind of blown out a little bit too much, whereas on the Pixel 4, it did a much better job of exposing them. This is a furnace room. It is completely dark, and the results kind of surprised me. 11 Pro did a better job. It's cleaner, there's less noise, and you can see stuff in the background. I'm finding the Pixel to do a good job too, but it's pushing more towards the blues, and I just find there to be a bit too much noise. So this nighttime shot is kind of tough because they both look really equal except for the color science. It just depends on the mood you're in. Do you want a cooler tone like you have on the iPhone that looks a lot more representative at that time of night? Or do you want more of a warmer tone that makes the picture a little bit more inviting? I will say this though, the Pixel 4 did a slightly better job. If you look at the open sign and the other two lights beside it, it's slightly better exposed than the 11 Pro, but the differences are so minor. Flipping the camera to the front-facing shooter, Pixel 4 just has the advantage because it has night sight, whereas the 11 Pro does not have any sort of night mode for the front-facing camera. As you can see here, it's just brighter, it looks better, and you can see everything in the background. In this nighttime photo, I want to test out exposure. Both of these phones are doing a pretty good job. Pixel is definitely a little bit brighter, so if you look at the building on the left-hand side, you're gonna see a bit more noise, but at least you can make out the details of the balconies on that building. Color science, I mean, same idea. Pixel 4 is boosting the contrast in the grass. You are getting a bit too much blue around the lights, whereas the iPhone looks a bit more realistic. Flipping it back to the front-facing shooter, and this is a tough one. I think they both do a really good job. I think the Pixel 4 did a better job with highlight exposure, but the iPhone just looks a little bit more vibrant. This is a tough one. I think this one is purely subjective. And last up, front-facing camera again, portrait mode, both did a great job. This time the iPhone is a little bit more punchier. They both look good. I think I look a little bit older with the Pixel 4 as it tends to be a bit more aggressive. But again, the Pixel 4 is doing a better job with blurring the background. Like, if you look at the sides of my heads, it's getting the hair better, compared to the iPhone 11 Pro. This was a very interesting camera comparison because the differences between both phones for regular stills were very small. Yes, the Pixel 4 has more dynamic range and mostly takes better pictures, but the gap is so small. It's not like previous years where the Pixel was just completely destroying the competition. Nighttime photography, these both are pretty much tied. Unless you're talking about the front-facing camera, then the Pixel does a better job just because it has night sight on it. Video, iPhone just destroys the Pixel in terms of video quality, except for the front-facing cam. They're pretty even, but overall, the video is better on the iPhone. Now, I still prefer the iPhone overall just because it has the ultra-wide lens, it has more features to play with, giving you more options to use as tools when you're using the phone as a camera. The Pixel 4 is great, but I think they missed out big this year by not including the third lens and the extra features that a lot of people want. Anyways, that wraps up this camera comparison. Let me know your favorite in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video.